Okay, good afternoon, everyone. Welcome to the final session of Shakti Rising. Thank you so much for being here. Let's begin with a brief acknowledgement. So just coming to gently close down the eyes and sit with a tall spine. Acknowledging the traditional custodians of the land on which you're sitting. For me, that's the Gadigal people of the Eora Nation. Acknowledging the golden chain of teachers that come before us within all of our spiritual traditions, but for me, particularly the Bhakti Yoga tradition. And acknowledging our own personal culture and ancestry, which we're going to be talking a lot about this afternoon. The wisdom keepers and the teachers from within our own culture. Guru Brahma, Guru Vishnu, Guru Deva, Maheshwara, Guru Sakshat Param Brahma, Tasmai Shri Guruve Namaha. I bow down in reverence to all my teachers, that teacher which is this life I have been living and continue to lead, that teacher which is all hardship and difficulty on my path, that teacher who is nearby, and that teacher who is beyond all this, loving and supreme. Namaste. Beautiful, welcome. I'm just letting a couple more people in, which is lovely. I know there are many of you who will be watching the recording as well. So as well as those of you joining me live, a warm welcome to those of you who are watching the recording. If you're able to join me with your camera on, I love that. It really helps me to engage with you if I can see you, and there's lots of familiar faces I can see, so it's really nice to see you. Thank you for being here. And of course, if you haven't got your camera on, I completely understand, because my household is crazy too, so I know what that's like. So this afternoon we're going to talk a little bit about culture and ancestry, and I'll give a little bit of context to that. So probably a couple of years ago now, I started to think more about the acknowledgement of country and the sort of acknowledging of the First Nations people when I teach. And part of that came from my teacher of Ayurveda, who I've already mentioned a couple of times in this training, Mother Maya, or Maya Tawari. Maya Tawari is her birth name, and then she took vows as a Vedic nun, and she became, her devotees, her students like myself, call her Mother Maya, but her spiritual name is Swamini Mayatitananda, which is quite long, so that's why we call her Mother Maya. Anyway, she really emphasized the importance of acknowledging traditional culture, acknowledging indigenous culture, and acknowledging our own ancestry, which is what I'm going to talk about today, which in Sanskrit, there's a word called tarpana. I'll write it in the chat for you. Tarpana. And tarpana, oh, hang on, I put that, let me put it to everyone rather than just one person. There we go. Tarpana is the acknowledgement and the engagement with, it's not just an acknowledgement, it's like a reciprocal relationship, like an engagement with our ancestors and our own personal culture. So there are a few things that Mother Maya has said about that, which is, you know, one of them, which I love, is that if you have a particular food that you feel really drawn to or that you crave that is part of your ancestral lineage, you kind of get a get out of jail free card in terms of being able to consume that food and not worrying too much about whether it's good for your constitution or not. So my grandmother always used to make apple strudel. My grandmother was Austrian, and I can still remember her like rolling out. She used to make the phyllo pastry by hand, which you know, no one would ever do that now. And I remember on her kitchen bench top would be like these huge long sheets of phyllo that she'd be very keen to make sure they didn't get like damaged in any way. And so that for me is so evocative. It's such a sort of family food, you know, the apple strudel, and that, you know, eating that and then making it for my kids, which I do with frozen phyllo that I buy from the supermarket, is part of Tarpana. It's part of celebrating the ancestry. And whenever I do that, I always think, oh, it doesn't matter, you know, don't worry about the sugar or the gluten, or is it good for this constitution or that constitution, because it kind of supersedes all of that, right? It's just a deep ingrained part of who I am and my childhood memories. And one of the things I always really loved about my Ayurveda teacher, Mother Maya, is that she was a rule breaker. You know, she's not one who's kind of like really set on doing things in a really particular way, which is unusual in Ayurveda, because Ayurveda is full of rules and regulations and lists and protocols, and can be very strict and quite dogmatic in the way that it's taught and shared. So yeah, for me to have a teacher who was flexible in that way and encouraged that flexibility in her students was a very beautiful thing. And I think a very feminine thing, a very Shakti thing, because the divine feminine acknowledges that we need to have flexibility, right? The masculine is very linear and rigid and good at getting stuff done, but the feminine is a little bit more the winding road and more open to you know, being flexible. So yeah, a couple of years ago, I started contemplating the idea of the acknowledgement of country and thinking about that in the context of the teachings I've received from Mother Maya, my Ayurveda teacher. And over a period of time, I sort of started to put together my own interpretation of the acknowledgement of country. And that also was influenced by a woman called Eve White, who some of you know, who I've done quite a bit of work with in terms of, you know, understanding cultural awareness, conversations around cultural appropriation. She has Indigenous background as well. So looking at yoga through the lens of, you know, Australian First Nations influence, all that kind of thing. And basically I came up with, for myself, and those of you who've been around, you know, in my sessions for a while will know this, 3 different elements that I consider to be really important when we do an acknowledgement. The first one is the First Nations people of wherever we are. And I know that, you know, some of you are watching this who are in the States. There's people actually all over the world. It's quite an international community at the moment. Probably most watching live right now in Australia because of the time zones. But for those of you in other countries, you know, the First Nations people from your own place, it doesn't just have to be what I'm talking about. And then the second thing is your teachers, right? The second element is the we call it the golden thread in yogic tradition, but like, what are the influences in terms of guru, teachers, traditions? So there might be a religious connection there. Like if you were raised within a particular religious tradition, that might be relevant. If you're a practicing yogi, if you are you know, practicing in some other type of spiritual tradition, then we remember the teachers that come before us within those traditions. Like for me in this container in particular, I'm thinking a lot about Mother Maya and my Ayurveda teachers, because I'm sharing a lot with you around those teachings right now. But if it was, I don't know, yoga asana or something like that, I might have other teachers in mind. But we acknowledge that we don't sit in a void, right? And one of the things you'll notice me doing often is crediting my sources. So I'll try my best to say, oh, you know, this thing that I read in this book, or this thing that this teacher said, or this thing I heard on this podcast, because I recognize that I'm not sitting in the center of my Shakti. I'm not sitting in the center of my embodied divine feminine in her power if I think that I'm doing so on my own, right? The Shakti always exists in a context, always. She has her sisters sitting side by side. She has her ancestors behind, and she has future generations in front of her. And this is how we sit in context in Shakti together, with this image of the community, the women's circle. I mean, as I see your faces on Zoom now, this is the virtual women's circle that we sit in, right? And then the ancestors behind us and future generations in front of us. And it really doesn't matter if those future generations are children that you have, you know, had yourself, or whether it's children within your community, children that are in extended family, in other contexts. It's not about, again, it's not about being a mother. It's about this idea that we create legacy. You know, I was reading the other day, I'm sure many of you know about this, in Canberra, there's a project where they're planting so many different trees of so many different species as part of a kind of regenerative and educational project, and it's costing millions of dollars. Like, it's a huge undertaking. And the beautiful thing about the project is it's not for our generation. Like, it's not actually going to come into fruition until my children's children are old enough to go and visit Canberra and see the efforts that we put in now for the legacy of future generations. And I love that. I love that idea of investing in a legacy that goes beyond our own efforts. It's something, or our own, what will even be part of our own lifetime. And so that's this idea of, thinking about ourselves in the context of who our teachers are and who our guides are. And then the final part of that, so we've got First Nations people, we've got our own spiritual lineages, which are often chosen. They might be part of our culture and our heritage, but could also be chosen. Like, I wasn't raised in a yogic tradition. That's part of my calling, I guess you could say, but it's a chosen practice for me. And then the third piece is our own culture and our own ancestry. And I wanted to specifically focus in on that today. What's really interesting for me around that is I feel that, and you may disagree with me here, but I notice this narrative a lot, particularly as I've been doing this work, that often in our modern Western culture, it's kind of on trend to be very negative about our culture or ancestry or our heritage from birth, particularly if you were born white, and for me, having a background from Great Britain, which is colonial background, even more so. But there's a lot of, even if we just think about things like, for example, the way that we think about and reflect on our childhood, there's often a lot of, oh, this happened in my childhood and that happened in my childhood, so now I'm X, Y, and Z. And it's sort of like the narrative around all the things that went wrong or that were toxic or that were dysfunctional, right? And I'm just want to be really, really crystal clear that I'm not in any way in today's session negating traumatic or challenging things that have happened to people in their childhood or in their culture or in their ancestry. I'm not saying that colonialism was okay. I'm not saying that child abuse is okay. Like, please know that I deeply acknowledge all of the things that have happened within my own culture and ancestry and within my own childhood and my own family that are traumatic and difficult and complicated. With all of that said, just like within every person, and we spoke about this previously in these sessions, we are multifaceted, right? We contain, as Bob Dylan famously said, we contain multitudes, right? So just as within every person, there are challenging parts and unhealed parts and confusions and difficulties, there are also great joy, great artistry, great knowing, great wisdom, and we contain it all, right? And when we can reconcile that within ourselves, I think that's actually a really important part of spiritual maturity, right? When we don't polarize and say, I'm either all good or I'm all bad, or I did this thing that wasn't so great, so therefore I'm going to beat myself up. It doesn't serve anybody to have that very polarizing view of ourselves or others. So when we start to see the nuance and we start to see, okay, I'm just a complicated human being and so is everybody else, then we can be much more forgiving and much more non-judgmental. And when you understand a little bit about Ayurveda and the constitutional types, that really helps too, because then we can start to say, okay, this person isn't lazy, they're just a kapha person, so they have a slower approach than I do, or this person isn't a complete maniac, they're just pitta, so they rush in and they're quite forthright, and that's part of their natural constitution, and so on. So I have found the Ayurveda model to be really helpful in that way as well. But wouldn't it be a beautiful thing within all of the confusion and all of the dysfunction and all of the toxicity that we can all name and label, to also look for that which is beautiful and that which is worth celebrating and worth noticing? And so I've been on a real mission in the last few years of my life to really start to think back around my own ancestry and my own cultural background, and find the stories and find the characters, I guess you could say, that have something that I can lean on and feel connected to that will help me to be a better version of myself. And so I'm going to share a couple of those stories with you today. And, you know, I'm sharing them just purely to give you an example of the kind of thinking that I've gone through. But you will have your own versions of this. And let me tell you something else, right? This is me being very open and vulnerable with you now. I have a very difficult relationship with my father. I haven't spoken to my father for over 15 years. He's still alive. He was not a good figure in my childhood. So it's really easy for me to go straight to all the stories around my father that are hurtful and have caused damage, and that I've spent years in therapy working through, right? Those stories are there and they're part of my lived experience. However, what I've also done, and I'm not saying I haven't looked at that stuff, because I definitely have. It's not just that you put that to the side and go, okay, I'm just going to pretend none of that happened. Like, we do the work there too. But I also look back on my family line from my father's side, as well as my mother's. And I've asked myself, okay, there was so much alcoholism, there was so much dysfunction, there was poverty, like there was a lot of stuff. What was there that was beautiful? What was there that was interesting? What was there that holds a thread of something good? And so I want to share with you a story. At the moment, I'm working on a set of affirmation cards, like inspiration cards. Some of you probably have seen that I've created some before to do with the Mindful Living series. I'm actually creating a set of affirmation cards or inspiration cards to go with the teachings within my Ayurveda Goddess program. And it's been a project I've had on the back burner forever. And recently I've been working with it on Edwina, who's here on this call. She's an amazing creative designer and graphic design whiz, and has a beautiful eye and a beautiful vision and a beautiful capacity to bring my ideas into something real, which I struggle to do. Recently we've been working with creating these cards, and we're doing it in a way that is about like collage and montage. So we're taking lots of different photos and images and little gold threads and pieces of lace and beautiful floral arrangements, and we're making them into what will become these beautiful inspiration cards that will then be, you know, printed and published and available for you to buy. And as we're going through this process of creating the collages, I suddenly the other day had this memory of something that my grandmother told me. And I swear to you, I haven't thought about this for like, well, I'm 45 now, and she would have told me when I was probably 10 or 11. So, you know, 35 years. I remembered sitting in my lounge room at home with my grandmother as a child. And I remembered her, and she never spoke about the war or spoke about her childhood or spoke about really the past, because she had had a very traumatic, upbringing. And then she married an alcoholic, which was my father's father, and, you know, many difficulties. But she told me this story. She said, you know, after the war, we lived in in Australia, we would call it housing commission. In England, they call it council flat or council accommodation, where the government provides you with accommodation. She said, we lived in this council flat, and, you know, big family in a very small house. And the toilet was still outside. It was still in the backyard. We didn't have an indoor bathroom. And she told me that she collected over a period of time lots of magazines, which back then would have been very precious. You know, everything was precious then. People were frugal. It wasn't like now where you just throw everything in the garbage and you find stuff in the street. She collected over time. And this is a woman who had 3 children, very little money. She was a single mother with an absent, you know, she didn't have any support from financially or otherwise from the father of her children. She worked as a cleaning lady. She did cleaning. So to even buy a magazine, I imagine for her would have been very frivolous. Like, you know, most of her money went on food and clothing and what have you. She collected these magazines. She cut out her favorite parts of the magazines and she stuck them all on the wall of the outside toilet and created a collage, like a beautiful, you know, inspiration wall. She created a vision board. I mean, she wouldn't have called it that. And then she told me that she got PVC glue, thick PVC glue, and she pasted it over the images and basically made a wallpaper vision board. And she said to me, sometimes I felt really, you know, Like if I was having a bad day or everything was too much, I was really tired, I'd just go and sit in the toilet, which I imagine now as a mother of 5 was probably the only place where she ever got any peace and quiet. She didn't say that, but I know that to be true. Sometimes you have to go and lock yourself in the bathroom for a moment just to get a second of peace. And she'd look at that wall that she had created on the in the outhouse, in the bathroom, in the toilet, and just imagine what it would be like to be a rich movie star. And I'm thinking now that the images that she would have been, people like Audrey Hepburn and Marilyn Monroe, original images of those women that to her would have been so incredibly aspirational. And so I remembered this story out of nowhere, and I was like, that was what my grandmother was doing. She was creating these vision boards, these beautiful montages. And that's what I'm trying to do with these inspiration cards. I'm collecting all these images and then making something beautiful out of them that will be inspiring to me and to other women, and that will tell a story and that will inspire positive action in our lives. And so I wanted to share that with you. I'm sure I'll write something about it to go with the cards that will hopefully tell that story. But that's a beautiful example of Tarpana, right? To take one little piece of the story of who you are and one little thread, and to remember that thread and to hold it through your life and to let it be resonant for you, and to know that there is something so precious in that, because it's actually part of the DNA, of the ancestry of who you are. One of the other examples I can give as a doula, as someone that supports women in childbirth, is that when we're birthing our children, which is often arduous and painful and challenging, to think of all the other women that have birthed before us and all the other women that will birth in the future, and to be inspired by the strength of what women are able to do, to see ourselves, in other words, in this collective context, rather than just little floating bubbles on our own. And I think the way that we live in our culture is often very isolated. We're often very in our very nuclear families, in our very closed communities, and we forget the web or the matrix of community that we live within. And part of my life's work and all the offerings that I do is an attempt to recreate that and to remind ourselves of that. So I had one other little thing I wanted to share with you, and then I'm going to open up for some questions and also ask you if there's anything that you guys would like to share. So one of the things that Mother Maya, my teacher, has encouraged us to do as part of this honoring of ancestry is to think about the objects that we use in our daily lives and that we have, and remember our ancestors as we do so. So, for example, I've got a couple of pieces of jewelry that my mother has given me that come from my grandmother and then from my great-grandmother, wearing those and remembering that lineage. Or if you have a piece of clothing that is like a vintage piece of clothing, or a piece of clothing that has been handed down to you. Even sometimes I've got items in my wardrobe that have been given to me by friends, like I've got dresses and things that a friend has said, oh, I thought this would really suit you, or just given me as a gift. And then they have a special resonance to them as well. Like when I wear them, I think of my friend, and I think of the energy behind being given that gift. So it could be jewelry, could be another beautiful one is if you have anything in your kitchen that you can use for cooking, like if you have plates or cups that have come from your mother or your grandmother or your great-grandmother. There was a bit of a trend, I know, when I was young, that everybody wanted everything to be brand new. So I remember my grandmother trying to give my mother all of her old crockery, and my mother saying, oh no, I'm buying new stuff. I don't want this old stuff. And now when I think back to what my grandmother would have been trying to give my mother, I would love to have all of that stuff. Who knows where it is now? It's long gone. But I do have one item which I wanted to show you. And so this is, I use this all the time. I use it for grinding. Let me hold it back so you can see it. I use it for grinding my Ayurvedic spices. It's a coffee grinder. It's my great grandmother's. It's from Austria. It was handmade in the Austrian Tyrol Mountains, which is where my great grandmother is from. So the way that it works is this is the little pot. You put the spices or the coffee beans in here. And then this part here is like a blade. It's quite blunt now, but it still actually works surprisingly well. And then you spin the handle and it grinds the coffee, or the I usually use it for spices when I'm making fresh. So it goes in through the top and then it grinds out and comes out through the bottom when I'm making fresh masalas. And every time I use it, I think of my grandmother and my great grandmother and my mother, and I just have this memory. And I think of the idea, I never met my great grandmother, but I imagine her hands doing the same work that my hands are doing. And I imagine what an incredible thing it would be if she even could have the inkling of the idea that as that same item was being used more than 100 years later, with my little daughter who's just learned to walk, running around as I'm still using that same thing. What a beautiful thread that is. So this is Tarpana. It's bringing to life through food, through our clothing, through the utensils that we use, through our memories, through the work that we do, the wisdom and the Shakti, literally the Shakti, the divine feminine energy of our ancestors and the stories of our ancestors. And it doesn't in any way dismiss the pain or the trauma that is in our ancestral line, but it acknowledges at the same time as holding space for that pain and trauma that there was beauty and that there is wisdom and that there are memories that are worth hanging on to. And we see this in Indigenous cultures. Like if you look at Indian culture, for example, which is relevant in our yogic tradition, or you look at Indigenous Australian culture as another example, these are both cultures that have been colonized and had a huge amount of pressure on them culturally to homogenize or to let go of their traditional practices, and yet have fought to keep them alive and have fought to keep language, to keep food, to keep tradition still vibrant, still filled with Shakti. And so I feel like if we can do that in our own families and our own lives, then there's something so beautiful in those memories. So I'd love to hear a little bit from you. You might want to just pop in the chat, or feel free, even if you want to unmute yourself and share with the group. Chelsea's saying that she's got a dress of her nana's from the 70s and she loves wearing it. And she also has her nana's tea set and pastry tools. So gorgeous. I love that. Oh, Edwina wore the dress her mum wore on her first date with her dad to her year 10 formal. That's just so beautiful. And lots of jewelry, bells and china from my grandmother. I love that. That's so wonderful. Have any of you got things packed away that you don't use? Have you got like, you know, special cups and crockery and things like that? Because I know that Mother Maya would tell you to get them out, dust them off and start using them. You know, maybe keep one or two things special, but the Tarpana actually happens in the use, right? In the memory, not in the just it's in the back of the cupboard and it's saved for a special occasion. Any more of those stories that anyone would like to share? Feel free if you'd like to share, to unmute yourself as well. Kelly says she doesn't have anything of her grandma's except memories and raspberry pie. Every time you make that raspberry pie, your grandmother is right there with you, I'm sure of it. Rima, I have my nanny's gold bangles and various kitchen items. I do use them. Yeah, they're mostly packed away until recently. It's just so beautiful to get them out. Wow, Chelsea, you just unpacked it today in your new home. That's amazing. How serendipitous. Beautiful.
I've got all of my grandmother's and my mother's things. So I'm the oldest woman in our family. And so I have households worth of things that I've been able to bring into our lives. And something that was really special that I'm thinking of during this conversation is when my mother died, she used to collect really beautiful long white nighties and soap, you know, and she would keep it for good. She'd always say, oh, don't use that, I'm keeping it for good. Anyway, she died and she didn't use any of it. So I divided it up between myself and my sister. And what we did with intention over the next few years, because there was so much of it, we used all of Mum's soap. And we wore all of her nighties until they were rags. And now every time it's our birthdays or Easter or Christmas, we always buy each other a new white old lady nightie, and one for each of the like my daughter and my sister's daughter as well, to keep that beautiful tradition. And it's just something that's so special. It feels, I think, you know, when you're wearing something, you really do take on that beautiful energy. And you know, like I've learned that special may never come if you keep it on a pedestal, but to make every day a little bit special is something that's really important and sacred to me. Yeah, so 90s and soap, they're my two big things.
Thank you so much for sharing. What a beautiful, beautiful story. And I love that you've continued it on with your daughter and your niece as well. It's so gorgeous. And it's funny about that special thing, isn't it? What I've come to realize is things are special if I appreciate them. It's not about not using them. It's about using them, but knowing that this is really special and I'm going to really appreciate it. I have some rose oil that I bought in India a few years ago, and it's so close to being finished. Like the bottle has just been dwindling and dwindling and dwindling, and I'm like so hesitant to use it up, but I have been using it, and every time I use it, I appreciate it so much and I enjoy it and I love it. And when it's gone, and that's life, part of life too. So yeah, it's I hope that your mother's, you know, looking down on you and enjoying watching you using all the soap, or having used all the soap. Thank you, Angela. I'm just having a look in the chat. My mum has made a boiled pudding in a cloth every year since her mother was no longer able to. Yeah, it's beautiful. And it's a tradition that's been passed down through the granddaughters. Yeah, it's really up to us to keep these traditions alive. And in our lives right now that are so fast paced and so busy and overwhelming, it's so easy for these things to fall by the wayside. It's really, you know, I feel like it requires a certain amount of effort and a certain amount of like really thinking about it and making the time and the energy to maintain these traditions. But it's such a precious thing to hand down to our children, and to, you know, all of the children, that they can feel the threads of the culture and the heritage that they come from. Okay, if there's anything else anyone wants to share on the Tarapana piece, the ancestral conversation, now is the moment to do that, because I'm actually going to then just segue into doing some questions and answers, because I've had a couple of people email me some questions, and then I'd love to open up to the group if you guys have any questions at all. So let's start with the ones that were emailed. So the first question that I was emailed was about books, which is one of my favorite types of questions. For somebody who's just starting out on this path and it's all quite new, what would be the books that I would recommend? So the book that I really recommend is called The Path of Practice. Those of you who've been around in my world for any time at all will have heard me recommend it. The Path of Practice is by my teacher, who I've spoken about a lot today and on the other days, Maya Tawari. It's a really amazing introduction to Ayurveda in the feminine form. There's a lot of stuff about Shakti in that book. It's super easy to read. It's written in the form of lots of stories and anecdotes, so that makes it really interesting. It's not heavy or, you know, academic. She's broken it into 3 chunks. So she goes through food, breath, and sound. So there's a section on mantra and using sound vibration for healing. There's a section on pranayama, and then a section on food as well. It's also a great book if you're a teacher, if you want to share the teachings of Ayurveda or yoga with your students, because it has lots of little mini practices that you can pull out and share in like a class. Like if you're a yoga teacher, for example, little meditations, or if you're running women's circles or that type of work, little practices that you can pull out and sort of share with others. So that's a great book. Another one that I really love is The Magic 10. Which I mentioned yesterday, actually, which is by my other teacher. Sharon Gannon. And that's a beautiful, I mean, I'm specifically recommending books. There's so many books I could recommend in general, but I'm specifically recommending books that have a good connection to Shakti prana, this idea of Shakti. So Magic 10 is a wonderful book. It talks about morning sadhana. It's a whole book on how to establish a very simple, elegant, and powerful morning sadhana from the moment you realize that you're awake through to sort of like a couple of hours after waking up. Sharon really shares a lot of her own personal stories and her own personal practices, and she's a person that has been doing daily morning sadhana for more than 40 years. Well, a lot more than 40 years, maybe 50, or she's in her 70s now. So yeah, a long time. So that's another really beautiful one. Oh wow, Leah, you found it in a secondhand bookshop. That's really lucky. Awakening Shakti is a beautiful book. Sally Kempton, I love all of her books. She is also beautiful. Yeah, she's a beautiful writer. So they're the main two. And then if you haven't read it already, my book, Mindful Living, is also, you know, it's pretty good. I put a bit of effort into it. In fact, actually, you know what? It's quite funny because I'm sure you've all had this experience in your life too. I picked it up again the other day. I haven't read it for ages or even flicked through it, but because I'm writing a new book at the moment, I thought, okay, I'll just have a quick look back. I wrote it in 2019, so it wasn't that long ago. And I picked it up thinking, oh, you know, I've obviously changed a lot in the last few years. I wonder if it will still kind of resonate, or like what I'll like, you know, how I'll feel about it. And I started flicking through it and I was like, you know what, this is all right. I'm happy with this. I can live with this. There's a lot of good stuff in here. So I felt still quite proud of it, which is not always the case. You know, sometimes when you look back on something you've done before and you're like, oh gosh, no, I've evolved a lot since then. I've got this guided yoga practice that I recorded about probably 15 years ago now, when I had the yoga studio in Newtown. And I had a lot of CDs of this practice pressed and gave them out to a lot of students, like hundreds. And the music is so terrible. Like, I don't know what I was thinking. It's like this violin-y but screechy, like a sort of, it's not good. Like the teaching is fine, but then this terrible music in the background. And when I listened to it a few years later, I was like, what was I thinking? And all the hundreds of people that I've given that track to that have tried to do yoga to this screechy violin music. So, you know, we don't always look back and think that was awesome. But Mindful Living is a good book. If you go onto my website, you'll find it there. And it's actually a really good segue for me to talk a little bit about Ayurveda Goddess, which I do want to mention in this call. So I know many of you have done or are doing my Ayurveda Goddess training, but for those of you who aren't, it is the next natural progressive step on from the Shakti Rising work. I created Ayurveda Goddess with my teacher's blessing, with Mother Maya's blessing, and she's infused throughout the training. We go through 8 different modules. We talk a lot about all the different elements of Shakti and divine feminine work, health and healing. And the Mindful Living book is actually part of that training. So if you join Ayurveda Goddess training, then you get the Mindful Living book as a PDF is included within that. I do want to answer a couple of other questions, but I do know that there are a couple of people here who have done Ayurveda Goddess. So for the women who haven't, who might be thinking about joining, I might just ask a couple of people who have done Ayurveda Goddess if there's anything that they want to share or say about what their experience was of doing that training. Edwina, do you want to hop in and say something?
Hi everyone, I loved Ayurveda Goddess and I feel so grateful that I got to go through the program. It's been so valuable and such a gift in my own personal life. Being able to integrate beautiful practices and sadhana has just been, it's just been such a gift. And I've been, following Ayurveda for a long time and practicing yoga for 20 plus years. And it wasn't until I did Ayurveda Goddess that I felt like I could actually really embody a lot of the practices in my everyday life. And I've actually taken that on and I've taught my own students in my own yoga business and my Ayurveda business. And so the ripple effect of Ayurveda Goddess has just been immense. So I really have just enjoyed it thoroughly. So thank you.
Thank you. It's so lovely to hear. And I especially love it when I hear that not only are the teachings resonant for you, but they're, you know, in your work as well, like you're sharing them with other women, because that, for me, it is that creation of legacy. And I think that as teachers, that's what we really want to do. That's, you know, as important as sharing with our communities is that our communities then go on to share with others. In fact, it was interesting. I was looking today, somebody had posted a question on Instagram about people like copying her work or like using her work without credit. And I get that that can be problematic, but actually when I see people using my work and sharing my work, I'm always really happy, because I just think, well, it's more people that get to learn about Ayurveda, and I don't own this work. So, you know, it's lovely when it's shared. Thank you. There's actually quite a few of you on this call that have been in Ayurveda Goddess, and some of you that have done it, like, I think even maybe more than once. Chelsea, you've been through the program, haven't you? Is there anything you'd share about it? Just put you on the spot. Oh, you're muted though. Oh, maybe you can't unmute. No, okay, doesn't matter. Anyone else?
I've done it.
How was it for you today?
It was amazing. If you haven't done it, I really recommend it. As I mentioned before, I'm the oldest woman in my family, and I'm not quite 49 yet, so that makes me a pretty young queen of the throne. And I guess something that was really special for me was how it has encouraged me to keep my lineage alive and keep a connection with my mother, who I had a very uncomfortable relationship with for most of my life, and one of my grandmothers, who I had a really beautiful relationship with and was actually closer to. I found that a lot of the work within the course, for me, it felt like learning or relearning knowledge that I held within my DNA already. And it was like, oh yeah, I know how to do that. I can do that. I do that, but I didn't notice I was doing that. And I think it just made the mundane seem more sacred and special. It made me look at my body and my human being in a totally different way, and in a way that I sort of was able to gather more respect and love for myself than what I had had before. And I've been going through a really a difficult time over the last 12 months, personally and work-wise, and I feel that the goddess training has sort of created a really amazing foundation for me, like a buffer zone between what is going on and my response to it. So I feel like it's something that we should all learn as women, and then there's versions of it that can be translated through to remembering your father's lineage as well. I think, you know, there's, because we have male and female in all of us, and yeah, it's incredible. And if you can get Katie's book to go along with it, I really recommend that as well, and her journal and her cards. I've got all of them. And I found that throughout the goddess training, I was pulling them out all the time. I still do pull the cards, you know, quite a bit, and just a really supportive feature on my altar. It's there all the time.
Thank
you, Katie.
Thank you. That's so lovely. It's really beautiful. And Chelsea just wrote in the chat that she's engaged with the course in layers, deepening with each dip in. I love the community element, the ongoing learning. And that, yeah, there's two things in there that I'm really happy to hear, because I designed the course deliberately in that way. First of all, that once you sign up, you get lifetime access. So you can go in and come, like, go out and in again. And I think courses like that are so valuable. You know, I've been reflecting on this recently because I'm creating some business content at the moment, and I was thinking about all the different business trainings and courses I've done, and I remembered that the very first training I did, business training online, was Marie Forleo's B school, and I did it like, I don't know, like honestly 15 years ago. And I still go back into that course sometimes. She gives lifetime access. The course is still active, and I still go back in and get things from it like 15 years later. And I love that. I love that it's still available to me. So I was really inspired by that model of like, when you're in, you're in. And then we also have monthly live calls, and sometimes more. I've got a couple of guest teachers that are coming up soon that'll be like additional ones. But yeah, the live component keeps it alive, because if it's all just stuff that you do at home on your own, it can be more challenging to kind of find the motivation for that. But when we get together in calls very much like this one, yeah, the ongoing learning and the sort of live sessions are there. I do want to move on to answering other questions, because I don't want this to all just be me talking about Ayurveda Goddess, even though I could talk about it till the cows come home. Rima, did you have a question? If you do, just pop it in the chat, or feel free to unmute yourself. I can see you've got your hand up, but maybe you didn't mean to do that. I'm going to segue over to one of the other questions that was emailed to me earlier, which is, and I love this question because I totally resonate with it. A beautiful lady was asking me what to do when you just feel really, really tired, and you feel like you just don't have the energy to do sadhana, to do spiritual practice. Like you really just, life is too busy and too full, and yeah, tiredness is there. Well, there's a few things I'd say, but I'm going to give two pieces of advice. First of all, usually when you're tired, it means that you need more rest. And I know that sounds like the most obvious thing I could possibly say, but it's the thing that we ignore. So my teacher, Mother Maya, always used to say, if you're doing a yoga nidra or a guided relaxation or shavasana or meditation or any practice, and you feel like you're falling asleep, a lot of teachers would say, you know, sit up, or, you know, open a window, or, you know, try to stay awake. She always used to say, have a nap, because obviously that's what you most need to do. So for me, when I'm struggling with tiredness, I always try to take it as a red flag and acknowledge that what that means is I need more sleep. It's a very simple cure, right? It's like when you're hungry, eat food. So if tiredness is prevalent, the first step is just looking at your sleep hygiene and your sleep habits. So like for me, I get up pretty early. That's definitely part of my rhythm. And I have a baby, which also means I get up early, but I just go to bed early. I really prioritize it. And I can tell you, just like everybody else, there's so many times when I'd rather stay up and watch a TV show, or, you know, have a cup of tea with my partner, or your kids are doing something that they want me for, or whatever it might be. I mean, I go to bed way before my two teenage boys. But I really prioritize early nights and sleep. And then sometimes when I'm lucky and when I can, I also have a rest in the afternoon. I'm lucky that I work from home and I can do that. But the general principle is, if there's a lot of tiredness in your life, it means you're not getting enough rest. So very first question is, where can you build in more rest? And I know that you probably have a million reasons why you don't think you can, but if you really prioritize it, you probably can, and you will feel so much better for it. Everything changes when you're not sleep deprived. Everything changes. Your whole outlook on everything becomes different. And lack of sleep, or poor quality sleep, is such a big drain. So that's the first thing. The other thing I would say is, I want to talk about something that I call trusted practices. And I actually write about this in the Mindful Living book. So trusted practices are the things that we come back to when we're struggling and we just need something that's easy. So like a nice analogy for this, it's like the things that you make for dinner when you just can't think, and it's like, what's the easiest thing? So might be like, I don't know, pasta with red sauce, like a few veggies, you know, it's like the easiest dinner you can possibly think of when you've just got to put something on the table. So these are the trusted practices, right? I recommend that you come up with your own repertoire of 2 or 3 trusted practices. And they'll be different to mine, because they've got to be the ones that are just really quick and easy for you. For me personally, I mean, my most simple trusted practice is literally light a candle or put some essential oils in the diffuser and just put my hand on my heart and take 3 deep breaths. That's the quickest, easiest, most efficient, trusted practice that I have. Another trusted practice for me is japa meditation. So I use the mala beads and I practice japa meditation, which if anybody is really keen to learn more about that, I'm really happy to share some resources with you, free resources around that. So if you're interested in that, but you don't know how to do it, just email me and I'll more than happy share with you some videos and some tutorials around how to do japa, because for me, that's the most potent, trusted practice. Meditation using a mantra, using mala beads. Other trusted practices for me, I find, I mean, this sounds like a silly one, but actually I like to tidy up. Like I find I'm a person when my mind is feeling very distracted or full, or I'm feeling overwhelmed, if I create order, it really helps me to feel better. And not everyone is the same as that. So, you know, this is quite personal to me. But like, for example, if I've got a lot of work to do, I'll quite often start with just tidying up my desk, because it helps me to get into the right kind of mental state. Or, you know, like a little bit of housework, like just using that as some sort of thinking time. That could be part of my trusted practices. Reading is a really big one for me, particularly spiritual texts. So I know that I can change the way that I'm feeling and thinking and my mental states quite quickly if I read uplifting text. Choosing how you consume media is another part of important part of how you can work with a tired you. So often when we're tired, we make poor choices. You know, we might choose the not the best food, or the not the best habits, or we can become a little bit kind of dysfunctional and start like staying up even later, or, you know, watching some horrible gritty drama thing that kind of has us on the edge of our seats, but then we don't sleep very well. So when I notice that I'm really tired, I always try to bring myself back to making what we would call in Ayurveda and yoga sattvic choices. So sattva is like the wholesome choice, the choice that's going to lead you towards the light, rather than something that's going to kind of pull you further into your funk. So there's some of my trusted practices, but for you, it might be different. I mean, for some people, it will be, you know, yoga asana, or it might be yoga nidra, relaxation. So many different options. If you play a musical instrument, it might be playing a musical instrument. I know a few people that's really helpful for them. Let me just have a quick look through the chat. Yeah, minestrone soup is one of my trusted practice food offerings, definitely. Like everything soup, like whatever veggies are in the bottom of the fridge, soup. Yeah, essential oils are very much a part of my trusted practices, because for me, my sense of smell, my relationship to my sense of smell is really strong. Like I get very, I'm very sensitive to that. So when I diffuse oils or burn incense, it really changes my mood. Like it has a very strong impact. Yeah, sweeping the floor, that's a beautiful one. Gardening, of course, getting out into nature. I was teaching the Ayurveda training recently, and I was talking to a woman who is very Vata, and Vata is the air element. And what happens with Vata is we get really, really overwhelmed and tend towards sort of forgetting the things that we know are nourishing for us, a bit like a headless chicken kind of vibe. And this lady that I was coaching and working with, she was saying, you know, I just feel very disconnected from who I really am, and you know, my center, and like really like I'm losing touch with myself. And so we spoke for a little while, and then what we came to for her is that she used to many years ago do ceramics and make beautiful pottery. And she hadn't done it for something like 20 years. And she just had this big light bulb moment where she was like, oh my goodness, going back to ceramics, going back to working with clay would be the best thing for me. And for Vatas, it's so good because Vatas need to do things with their hands, and they also need grounding. So working with clay, which is like the earth, is so perfect for a Vata person, like that tactile element of like literally working with the earth in their hands and then creating something, which Vatas are very creative. It was so beautiful to witness her have this aha moment of like, oh yes, this is a practice. This is a sadhana for me. This is something that would really bring me into my body, that expresses my creativity, that makes me feel grounded, that really brings her back into her Shakti. But, you know, for me personally, I don't want to do that. I don't want to do ceramics and work with clay. Like, I'm not very good at crafty things. That's not my jam. I get frustrated. It's not, I'd much rather sit and like write a poem or make a beautiful meal. So this is the whole point of all of these teachings, is that we're all different. We have to find our thing, right? And when you find those trusted practices, those things that really work for you, it's just such a game changer. It really is, because then you have them there to rely on. You can come back to them and they can bring you back to center. Those are the questions that I had that people had submitted previously. I'd love to spend just the last few minutes, if anyone here in the group has any questions that you'd like to ask me, please feel free to either pop it in the chat or just unmute yourself and ask away.
Hi, I'm going to unmute myself if that's okay, because I'm
Please.
trying to use
Hi,
the
Leah.
phone. Hi. With the Ayurvedic Goddess course, if you've already done certifications in like Ayurvedic nutrition, and I've studied Kundalini Women's Yoga, is it still, I want to study with you, because everything you say just makes my heart smile. And I want to know, is it still worth me signing up and doing it? Like, is there stuff that I'm going to learn? And I know that I will love the live calls with you, because every call in the past 3 days has been amazing. And I got a load of Maya Tawari books for like $15 off of Marketplace and have been reading through them. And my yoga practice is called Living Ahimsa, which is apparently a book she wrote, but I named it years ago based on veganism. So I feel like everything's gone like this, and I really, I wanted to know whether I was better off joining the Bhakti Club or your Ayurvedic Goddess training.
Yeah. Beautiful question. Thank you. And what an amazing coincidence that your work is Living Ahimsa, which is one of Maya's books. That's so beautiful. Living Ahimsa is one of her cooking books, recipe book.
I haven't, but I want to.
Yeah, I recommend. My two favorite books of hers are Path of Practice, and then if you want to go deeper, Women's Power to Heal. I'll write that in the chat as well. So that's one. That one's all about a lot of stuff about Shakti in there. It's a little bit more in depth, so I don't recommend that to people who haven't studied some Ayurveda. If you haven't got a bit of a background in Ayurveda, it'll be a bit like, oh, it's kind of harder to access. But for those of you who've done my training or done some training or read some books on Ayurveda, Women's Power to Heal is a beautiful book, particularly for women, and particularly around the reproductive journey, especially traveling in towards perimenopause, menopause, that type of thing. It's a very helpful book. So differences between Bhakti Club and Ayurveda Goddess. Bhakti Club is ongoing, obviously, and it's community, and some of it is the Ayurveda teachings and some of it is more broadly just women's teachings that I share and love. And to be honest, it's a very random mixture of, really, I mean, this sounds very arrogant and narcissistic. I hope it doesn't come across that way, but it's just things I'm really enjoying at any given time. Like, I created this membership because there's like, I've got all these different interests and things that I'm love to share and teach on. And then what I was finding is I just kept creating all these different programs and then sort of like marketing and promoting them. And they were all a bit like all over the place. So I was like, I'm going to create one container where everything that I want to share, I can just put it all in this one place. And if people want to work with me and want to follow the teachings, then they can come there and find a whole range of different things. So that's the Bhakti Club. Ayurveda Goddess obviously is specifically the Ayurveda training. The thing about Ayurveda Goddess is you'll get a certification. So if you want to share that work in the world and you're a yoga teacher or you're some kind of practitioner, it's really great for that. So it does give you that, which Bhakti Club is more just like an ongoing kind of support women's group. I think that the way that I teach Ayurveda is very, very different to the way that it is taught by most other people that I've come across. And I've done a lot of other trainings other than with my teacher, Maya Tawari. And the reason it's different is not really because of me, it's because of my teacher. Maya Tawari was an absolute pioneer in women's work that is about being not judgmental, not prescriptive, not you have to do this, you should do that, you know, rules and regulations that just make you feel like you're failing all the time. And I think, unfortunately, in the world of Ayurveda, there's a lot of that. There's a lot of like amazing teachers with incredible knowledge, but when you start to try and apply it and then you accidentally eat a biscuit or go swimming in the winter, or, you know, whatever, like break an Ayurvedic rule, put some ice in your drink, then it's all like guilt and shame and you've done it wrong and you're not really, you know, Ayurvedic. Whereas the way that I've been trained and the way that I now teach is much more about adding joyful things in rather than creating lots of rules of things that we can't do. So with all credit to my teacher and my teachers, I do think that the Ayurveda Goddess training, I'll be surprised if you did it, even having done other trainings, and didn't find that it was quite different. That's what I'd say. Thank you for that beautiful question. Anyone else? Karen.
Hi, how you going?
Good.
Yeah, I'd just like to back that up and speak to Leah. Yeah, I totally agree. I had done other trainings too. So once I'd signed up, and it's been a few years now since I've done it, but I do use it as reference constantly. So I'm going back and pulling out information and, you know, revisiting. But what it did for me was it opened up, I looked from a different lens, and I really did take a step back, and I wasn't so, it was almost like Katie sort of let us off the hook a bit, and we really did have the freedom to make it our own, as opposed to, like you said, you know, ticking the boxes and making sure that we were being Ayurvedic. So that's what I enjoyed most about it, that there was this freedom to be intuitive and really make it our own and find our way in our own time as well. So yeah, Leah, definitely do it, because I was the same. I'd done many trainings before, but this is the one I reference, and this is the one I try to integrate into my life with the freedom of the feminine, and really sort of creating it from that place. And then that's what I share with my students as well now. So, you know, I tell a story where I, you know, couldn't wait to do the workshop after I'd finished the course and got certified, and I had, you know, the plethora of information and the whiteboard, and within 20 minutes I just put it away, and we know this stuff, and it was just really intuitive. And I think that's what Katie teaches us to, we already know it. A lot of it is remembering and listening to ourselves and giving us the space and time, and then working from there with the guidelines. So yeah.
Thank you so much. That's so beautiful to hear. And I feel like that brings us full circle back to Shakti, and back to, you know, what this whole 3 days has been around, which is this idea of reclaiming, like remembering that we already know this. It's already innate within us. The spark of Shakti, the spark of your own divine feminine knowing is there. It's not something you have to find from someone else, or you know, go on a quest outside of yourself to seek. It's within you, and really all we have to do is come back to ourselves. And the reason that's difficult is because our culture is not set up to support it. That's the only reason it's difficult. It's not that easy to stay in the center of our Shakti because of the way our culture is, but it is possible. And I really see, and I know from the feedback that I get, you know, from women in this group and from women in all the groups that I teach, that this work is so powerful and it's so needed, and it's really possible. And the beautiful thing about it is, and this is why I chose to give this training the name Shakti Rising, is that the more we do this work, the easier it becomes, and we become elevated with it, like we rise up. So it really is like an upward spiral, you know. And I just spoke about that idea of trusted practices. Like the more we integrate our trusted practices into our lives, the easier it gets to just stay on this this pathway, that even when we have challenges, or we take a step back, or we get overwhelmed, or we're tired, we know we've got the tools, we know we've got the resources, the stuff that we need to support ourselves is there, and it's available to us. So with all of that said, I want to thank you all again for spending this time with me. I hope that it's been helpful. I really make a big commitment to always being available for my community. So if you have any questions, if there's something that you want support with, regardless of whether you sign up for Ayurveda Goddess or you don't, or you're in it already, or whatever paid offerings you choose to do with me, please do feel free to reach out. I always want to be able to support you with giving you resources, giving you any guidance that I can. I see that as a really important part of my work and the commitment to the lineage that I am part of, because my teachers have been so generous with me. So especially if something came up for you in the last few days that you felt shy to speak about publicly, or that you didn't want to share with the group, if there was something more private, please feel free to reach out to me privately by email, and I'll be more than happy to correspond with you, you know, in a context that's not within the whole group. Thank you for being here. For those of you who are listening to the replay, I'll upload this one today, and then that page will stay there for a good few weeks, so you can come back to this. I really liked the whole doing it on a page format. Did you guys like that? It's the first time I've done it that way. And in the past, I've done it in a Facebook group. And the thing about Facebook group is nice because we can all interact a bit more, but it means you're on Facebook, and then people have trouble finding the videos and the group and blah, blah, blah. So just having it all on one page like that, with the videos appearing as they get recorded, I reckon I'm going to use that format again. And, you know, long may we all stay off Facebook as much as we possibly can. I'll leave you with that as my parting piece of wisdom. Thank you so much, ladies. Have a beautiful evening. Stay in touch. Let me just end with a very short prayer for us all. Loka samasta sukhino bhavantu. May all beings everywhere be happy and free. May the thoughts, the words, and the actions of my own life contribute in some way to that happiness and to that freedom for all. Namaste. Namaste.